right now as we speak. There is a self-driving big truck running freight on a Texas interstate. There is no driver at the wheel. No one else up front, just a robot truck. It's hauling real freight for real money. And the company running that truck, they just logged over 5 million commercial miles, and they are well on their way to 50 million driverless miles. Now here's the part that really got my attention. Congress is handling two separate bills right now that are going to hand these companies the keys to every interstate highway in America. There is no independent safety testing required in any of this because they certify themselves. You heard that right. It's set up the same way ELD manufacturers certified themselves. And we all know how that worked out. Robot trucks are here and on the road now, not tomorrow, today. So let me start with the company that is the furthest down the road on this. It's called Aurora Innovation. They're based in Pittsburgh, and they launched driverless commercial operations in April of last year. Not a test, not a demo. Active freight, real customers, real loads. Their trucks are running a corridor between Dallas and Houston, between Fort Worth and El Paso, between Dallas and Laredo, and they have already expanded into Oklahoma City. Now here's the number I want you to sit with for a second. Aurora says their trucks can run over 250,000 miles a year. The industry average for a human driver is about 100,000 miles a year. That means one Aurora truck can do the job of two human drivers, and they're planning to have hundreds of these trucks on the road by the end of this year. So the robot is real and it's here. The question is, how did it get here? And more importantly, who in Washington is helping it get from Texas to every state in the country? Because there are two bills working their way through Congress right now, and I think every driver in America needs to understand what's in those two bills and how it could impact the trucking industry. My name is Jim Campbell, 30 years behind the wheel in the dispatch office and in the broker seat. The bills, what Congress is actually doing. All right, so there are two separate pieces of legislation here, and they're moving at the same time. The first one is the Self-Drive Act, introduced back in February by a congressman from Ohio. Here's what that bill does in plain English. Right now, autonomous truck companies are stuck in a legal gray zone. They can test on public roads in states that allow it, but they can't run as a national commercial operation because the rules are different in every single state. Some states say you need a human in the cab. Some states say you don't. Some states ban them completely. The Self-Drive Act fixes that by creating one federal standard. However, this also allows robot trucking companies to run limited commercial freight operations while they're still under a testing permit. Yup, you heard me right. They can haul freight and charge for it before the testing is even finished. The second bill is the big one. It's called the Build America 250 Act. That's the 5-year surface transportation reauthorization, a $580 billion highway bill that has to be passed before September 30th of this year, or the current law expires. Buried inside more than 1,000 pages of that bill is something called Subtitle E, and this is the first time Congress has ever tried to write a national rulebook for driverless trucks. Now, here's where I want to slow down, because a lot of headlines are saying, this bill clears driverless trucks to run coast to coast. That is not accurate. What it actually does is hand the Department of Transportation a 2-year homework assignment to write the safety standards for autonomous trucks in interstate commerce. So the trucks don't get a green light tomorrow. But Congress is building the on-ramp. And the question is, who's going to be writing those safety standards? And will drivers have a seat at that table? That brings me to the part of the story that I think is the most important. And it's the part nobody's talking about. The self-certification problem. Here's the part that made me super uneasy and in my opinion will cause problems if implemented as is. Both of these bills include what's called a safety case requirement. Sounds official, right? Sounds like there's some government inspector out there making sure these driverless trucks are actually safe before they're allowed on your highway. There isn't. The safety case means the manufacturer writes up a document explaining why they think their truck is safe. And then the government accepts it and takes their word for it. We've heard that before, haven't we? Remember the fiasco with the electronic logging devices? ELD manufacturers were allowed to self-certify their own devices with no independent testing and no government verification. The manufacturer said it worked. The government said okay. And drivers paid the price for years. Drivers were stuck with ELD devices that locked up and dropped data. The end result was innocent drivers being handed logbook violations when the equipment malfunctioned. Now picture that same system, but instead of an ELD logging device, it's an 80,000-pound truck with no one behind the wheel. The Build America 250 Act says that for Level 4 and Level 5 autonomous trucks, the fully driverless ones, the manufacturer assumes the legal duties of the driver when the system is active. Sounds like accountability, right? Here's the catch. Congress specifically wrote language into this bill that says it does not create a cause of action, it does not expand liability, and it deliberately left the liability question for the courts to figure out later. So if one of these trucks causes an accident, and NHTSA has already predicted there will be at least 200 automated vehicle crashes per year, yet nobody in Congress is prepared to tell you who will be held responsible. Now, I want to be fair here, because there is a side of this argument that actual people in the industry are making, and you need to hear it before you make up your mind. Look, I've been doing this long enough to know that when something is coming, it's coming. And the people running Aurora will point to some real numbers. Over 5 million commercial miles logged, 0 safety incidents attributed to their system, 100% on-time performance. And there's a real driver shortage argument here too. There are freight lanes in this country, long, flat, overnight runs through the desert where the industry genuinely cannot find enough drivers to cover these types of runs. Aurora will tell you their trucks aren't coming for the city driver. They say the robot trucks will cover overnight runs that nobody wants, and I can understand that argument. What I don't accept is handing these companies the keys before the safety standards are written, before the liability question is answered, before drivers have any representation in the room where those decisions get made. The ELD mandate got rammed through without drivers at the table. Lease purchase agreements got rubber stamped without drivers at the table. Are we really going to write the rules for 80,000-pound autonomous trucks without drivers having a seat at the table? Before I give you my final thoughts on this issue, I want to tell you where this information came from. The Build America 250 Act coverage and the Self-Drive Act information was gleaned from online trucking sources like thetrucker.com and FreightWaves. Meanwhile, the actual text wording of these bills are located on the congress.gov website. Aurora's mileage and fleet numbers came from their own SEC filings and investor letters. If this channel gives you information you're not getting anywhere else, hit subscribe. I do this so drivers have a solid informational source that isn't being paid by a carrier or is sponsored by a manufacturer. Please hit the bell and share this with a driver who needs to know what's coming. Now here's where I land on this subject. The autonomous truck is real and it's on the road today running freight, and Congress is busy building the legal framework to take it from Texas to every interstate in America. Meanwhile, companies like Aurora, Waymo, and Tesla have been pushing Washington for years to do their bidding, which is to clear the runway, and Washington is finally doing it. And they are doing so without independent testing, without liability answers, and without drivers in the room. Times are changing, the robot truck is real, and it's coming. I've accepted that. What I haven't accepted is that drivers are going to find out how bad the rules are the same way they found out about ELDs, which is after the fact and when it's too late to change anything. I'll keep covering this as long as you keep watching, so stay tuned. I'm Jim Campbell. As the late great Jim Morrison used to sing, remember to keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel. Drive safe out there, my friends.